There are moments in life when the human heart becomes more fragile, more sensitive, more open to what it cannot see. One of those moments is when you approach the grave of someone you love deeply. No matter how many years have passed since their departure, something within you pauses, something stills, something draws you toward that silent mystery where love remains, but the physical presence is gone. It is a place where the soul remembers, where memory speaks, where wounds feel tender once more. But there's something I've observed in many people over the years. They visit the grave with love, yes, but without fully understanding what they're doing there, without grasping the spiritual sensitivity of that place, without knowing that certain actions, words, or attitudes can have an impact that goes beyond the visible. Not because the deceased is listening in the same way as before, not because the grave has a special power, but because the relationship between the living and those who have passed on remains deeper than we imagine, and more vulnerable as well. When you approach the grave of someone you love, you enter a place where your soul is laid bare. Everything you carry within becomes more intense. Gratitude becomes purer, pain sharper, longing more palpable. But something else happens as well. Your heart becomes more open to God. Death awakens us, confronts us, shakes us to our core. And for that very reason, there are certain things you should never do at the grave of a loved one. Not because there is a harsh judgment from beyond, but because there are gestures that wound the soul of the deceased. And there are gestures that wound yours. The first thing you should never do is approach with a heart full of bitterness. Many people go to the grave carrying unresolved resentments, conflicts they never spoke of, wounds they never dared to name. They stand by the headstone with the same harshness with which they lived their last years with that person, as if the distance between the living and the dead justifies not confronting what was left unfinished. But let me tell you honestly, resentment doesn't die with death. It doesn't disappear because the other person is no longer there. Resentment doesn't free, it binds. It doesn't heal, it poisons. And when you approach the grave of someone you loved with resentment, that poison no longer falls on them. It falls on you. You cannot heal what you refuse to see. You cannot receive peace if your heart is closed in the very place where God wants to open it. And although you cannot ask for forgiveness face to face, you can offer it before God. You can release the bitterness that accompanies you. You can let love have the last word, even when the story on earth has ended. Do not take to the grave what God wants to tear from your soul. Do not allow resentment to define your final gesture toward that person. Because the bitterness you carry to that place doesn't just affect your own spiritual life, it affects the dignity with which you remember someone who can no longer defend themselves. Another painful mistake many make without realizing it is visiting a grave from a place of despair, not hope. Some approach as if death has destroyed everything, as if what they see there is the absolute end, as if love has been buried in that cold earth. But when you visit a grave with a despairing view of the world, something breaks inside you. You begin to look at your life without faith, without purpose, without direction. And even if you don't notice it, that despair weighs on the soul of the deceased. Not because they may suffer as before, but because the lack of hope in your heart distorts the way you receive their memory. The grave is not a place for darkness to take hold. It is a place where faith becomes more necessary than ever, where God's light becomes more urgent, where your soul needs to remember that love does not die, that life does not end at a tombstone, that God does not abandon those in his hands. When you visit the grave with hope, you do not deny the pain, but you allow the pain to find solace in something greater than itself. And that hope is a gift to you and an act of love toward the one who has passed. There's another gesture that many people don't understand and that you should completely avoid: speaking harshly, reproachfully, or blaming the deceased. Some people, driven by grief or frustration, stand before the grave to complain, demand explanations, or reopen old wounds, as if the weight of what remained unresolved needed to be thrown there onto the cold stone that bears a name. But when you do this, you're not releasing anything. You're deepening the wound within yourself. You're feeding a narrative that doesn't heal, that doesn't build, that doesn't honor the memory. And although the deceased can no longer be hurt in the same way as before, your heart can. And saying these things at their grave wounds your soul more than you can imagine. When you speak harshly in that place, you turn a sacred space into an emotional battleground where no one wins. But when you speak with love, with truth, with vulnerability, even with tears, then the grave ceases to be a place of rupture and becomes a place of inner reconciliation. And that reconciliation does have a profound impact, not only on your soul, but also on the way you honor the one who has passed. There's one more thing you should avoid: visiting the grave as if it were an empty obligation. Many go without heart, without presence, without intention. They go through the motions, but they don't feel. They're there, but they're not truly present. And when the visit becomes a mere formality, something in the soul grows cold. Memory loses its warmth. Love loses its voice. And that coldness affects the dignity with which you remember that person. Because honoring a loved one isn't about ticking a box. It's about encountering the story you lived together. There is another misguided way to approach a loved one's grave that seems innocent but reveals something deep within the heart, turning that place into a hurried experience. People arrive, quickly cross themselves, leave a few flowers out of obligation, murmur a few words, and leave as quickly as they arrived. There is no real presence, no silence, no opening of the soul. It's as if they want to tiptoe past the pain without stopping to listen, without allowing that moment to touch anything within them. But the places we love need to be inhabited calmly. Haste is the enemy of love. And when you visit a grave in a rush, you not only miss the opportunity to heal something deep, you also reduce that encounter to an empty gesture that doesn't honor the relationship that once sustained you. God doesn't ask you to spend hours there, but He does invite you to be present, to allow the silence to speak, to recognize that that place holds a story that deserves to be remembered with dignity. Silence is a form of prayer, and sometimes graves are the places where God speaks most gently to the human soul. Don't leave too quickly. Don't be afraid to stay a little longer. Sometimes a minute of silence at a grave can change you more than 100 words. Some people make another very common mistake, turning the grave into a place of superstition. They believe that certain gestures attract good luck, that certain phrases activate something spiritual, that the grave itself has power, that the deceased can directly influence earthly situations simply because they are asked there. But faith doesn't work that way. Graves are not magic altars. Prayer is not a ritual to manipulate the invisible. God doesn't answer through superstition. He answers through faith. When you approach a grave with superstition, you are distancing your heart from true comfort. Prayer becomes a transaction, not a relationship. And that confusion affects how you honor the departed. Don't turn that place into a space of fear or meaningless religious formulas. The grave is not a gateway to manipulate heaven. It is a reminder that we belong to God, that life is a gift, that love is stronger than death. True faith becomes clearer in such places, not more noisy. Another thing you should never do is visit the grave to feed your guilt. Some people arrive with thoughts like, I didn't do enough, I wasn't there when I should have been, I failed, I'm too late, I didn't give them what they deserved. The grave then becomes a silent tribunal where the person punishes themselves again and again for things that can no longer be changed. But guilt that festers on its own doesn't heal. It paralyzes, and that paralysis isn't an act of love for the deceased, and it's a wound not surrendered to God. True love doesn't invite you to punish yourself. It invites you to understand, to mature, to forgive. And yes, sometimes the hardest forgiveness is the one you need to give yourself. The deceased no longer lives in a world where mistakes are tolerated. They live in God's hands, and in God there is no condemnation for those He holds. If you visit the grave from a place of guilt, you are not honoring their memory. You are chaining your soul to a sterile pain. God doesn't want you to go there to wallow in regret. He wants you to go there to heal, to let go, to understand that love, even when it comes late, still has value, to understand that your tears, if offered with humility, don't drag you down, they cleanse you. There's another silent mistake many people make: visiting a grave carrying words they never dared to utter. There are things trapped inside. A thank you you never said, a forgive me you kept silent, and I love you you were too ashamed or afraid to express. And when you stand before the grave, those words stir within you like a knot that will never unravel. But there's something profoundly liberating about saying them there, not because the deceased might respond, but because your soul needs to speak. Say it, with tears if necessary, with a trembling voice, with a wavering expression, with sincerity. Say it even if no one else can hear you. Sometimes those belated words are the ones that heal the most. Don't do it out of fear that they'll be too late. In love, nothing is ever truly late when it comes from the heart. And God hears what you say in those places more than you realize. Another thing you should avoid is using the grave as a place to justify wrong decisions. Some people say things like, I'm doing this for you. I'm choosing this because I owe it to you. I'm acting this way because you would want me to. But often, behind those words are decisions that don't stem from love, but from fear, from unresolved grief, from false expectations. The grave shouldn't be a moral justification for carrying burdens that God never asked you to bear. Don't maintain broken promises to people who are no longer here, especially if those promises prevent you from living, healing, or moving forward. True love doesn't trap you. It sets you free. It doesn't impose burdens that destroy you. It invites you to move forward with wisdom, depth, and gratitude. Sometimes honoring someone doesn't mean keeping them present in every decision, but rather living in a way that reflects the best that person planted within you. I want you to understand something crucial. The relationship with those we love doesn't end. It changes, yes. It transforms, yes. But it doesn't disappear. Death sets a physical boundary, not a spiritual one. Love continues, memory continues, the impact continues, and precisely for that reason, your gestures at the grave matter. Not because they alter the eternal destiny of the one who died, but because they affect your soul, your perspective, your way of continuing to live, connected to the love you shared with that person. But there is an even deeper mistake, one that affects both your soul and how you honor the deceased. Visiting the grave without hope, viewing that place as the end, as the final chapter, as the last word. But God never lets death be the last word. For him, a grave is always a place where new things can be born: reconciliation, forgiveness, gratitude, openness, interchange, renewed trust. When you bring hope to that place, you don't deny the pain of loss. You illuminate it. There's a gesture many people make at a grave without realizing its spiritual weight, clinging to suffering as if it were the only way to show love. Some feel that if they stop crying, if they stop suffering, if they begin to heal, it would mean they're forgetting the person who died, as if pain were the purest proof of memory. And so they remain trapped in a sadness that prevents them from moving forward, from breathing, from looking at life without guilt. But true love doesn't depend on how much you suffer, but on how much you live what that person planted within you. Turning the grave into an altar of continuous suffering affects your own soul. It imprisons it, it extinguishes it, it confuses it. And although the deceased can no longer feel pain as you do, your inability to heal does affect how you honor their memory. Because perpetual pain is not a tribute to love, it is a chain. There is a kind of loyalty born of gratitude and another born of fear. Loyalty born of gratitude liberates, that born of fear destroys. When you go to your grave trapped in the idea that you must remain sad to demonstrate love, you are subjecting your soul to a burden that God never asked you to carry. God doesn't invite you to forget, he invites you to live. And to live is not to betray memory, but to give it continuity. There is another profound mistake many make, taking words to the grave that don't heal, but instead become inner chains. People who repeat phrases like, I can't go on without you, my life ended with you, I'll never be happy again. These words are born of pain, yes, but they have a devastating effect on the soul. They seal sadness as if it were a destiny. They mark life as if there were no more chapters to write. And let me tell you this with compassion, but also with truth. Those words don't just affect your present, they affect your future. They affect how you open yourself to new blessings, new relationships, new opportunities, new ways of living out the purpose God still has for you. When you declare that your life ended with someone's death, you are denying the story God wants to continue writing in you. Honoring a loved one doesn't mean ceasing to live. It means living more deeply, with greater sensitivity, and with a gratitude known only to those who have truly loved. If you feel life has lost its color, if you feel the absence weighs like a shadow, it's okay to acknowledge it. But it's not okay to let it define you. That loved one wouldn't want your life to fade. They wouldn't want to be the reason for your emotional ruin. Authentic love never asks for sacrifices that destroy. It asks for choices that build up. There's another gesture many make without realizing it: taking to the grave conversations you don't direct toward God. Conversations you repeat casually without opening your soul, without asking for guidance, without allowing faith to intervene. And when you do that, you're left alone with your thoughts, your pain, your doubts. But visiting a grave shouldn't be an exercise in spiritual solitude. It should be an opportunity for encounter, not only with the memory of the deceased, but with God Himself. There is a vast difference between speaking from a place of pain and speaking from a place of pain surrendered to God. In the first case, the soul is wrung dry without solace. In the second, the soul is laid bare to be embraced. You are not called to bear your grief alone. You are called to allow God to enter into your grief. He does not take away the pain by denying it. He transforms it by accompanying you. There's another gesture you should avoid: ignoring your own life when you're standing before a grave. Some people arrive there as if time has stopped, as if their own story has been suspended. But the grave isn't a place to freeze life. It's a place to see it more clearly, to understand how precious the time you have is, to reflect on what you're doing with your days, to remember that the only constant is the love we give and receive. Don't visit a grave as someone who looks back in despair. Visit it as someone who looks back to understand how to move forward more effectively. The past isn't there to trap you, it's there to teach you. The grave isn't a wall, it's a mirror. And if you look closely, you can see reflected questions that will help you live more consciously, love better, forgive more quickly, and speak more honestly. Another very common mistake is taking to the grave words that could have been spoken in life but never were. Words of recognition, affection, and gratitude. Many people believe it's too late to say them, and although they can no longer be heard as before, they are not meant to be lost. Speaking them softly with an open heart allows your soul to rest. What you never said didn't disappear, it became a burden. And love isn't meant to be a silent burden, it's meant to be expressed. Don't suppress words that want to come out. Not hearing them doesn't mean they have no value. God hears what comes from the heart. And sometimes healing consists of saying what you've kept inside for too long. You should also avoid comparing your grief to others. Some people reach their final days feeling they aren't suffering enough, or that others seem to have moved on faster. But grief isn't a competition. Grief doesn't have a stopwatch. Every heart has its own rhythm. Every story has its own shape. Every loss has its own depth. Comparing yourself only increases your suffering and distorts your own ability to heal. The grave is a place where you should encounter your own truth, not external expectations. Honor your process, respect your timing, listen to your soul. God doesn't ask you to mask your grief, He asks you to walk with Him through it. And now I want you to understand the most crucial, the most delicate, and perhaps the most powerful gesture of all. Do not go to the grave with a closed heart. No matter what you say, no matter what you carry, no matter how long you stay there, if your heart is closed, that encounter cannot transform you. A closed heart turns the grave into a reminder of what is lost. An open heart turns the grave into a reminder of eternity. If your heart opens, even just a little, even if it's trembling, even if it's afraid, that's where the healing begins. There is something sacred about the way you stand before a grave. You are not speaking to the stone, nor to the earth, nor even to the fixed memory of the one who has passed. You are speaking from the depths of your being in a place where your vulnerability, your love, your pain, and your need for hope converge. That is why it is so important to understand that the attitude with which you approach that space not only affects your soul, but also the way you honor the soul of the one who is no longer in this world. The question you should take with you isn't, what am I doing here? But what's happening inside me when I'm here? because the grave doesn't change who you are, but it reveals what's inside you. It shows what you left unfinished, what you didn't resolve, what you're grateful for, what hurts, what you haven't yet surrendered to God. And that revelation, though not always comfortable, can be one of the most profound gifts you receive when visiting a loved one. Never go to the grave looking for magic answers. There aren't any. Don't expect to hear a voice from the other side, or signs, or mysterious messages. That's not the language of God. What you can expect is something much truer, inner clarity, a gentle understanding, a light that begins in your heart, not outside of you, because that's where God speaks. That's where God rebuilds. That's where God reveals to you how to go on. Also, avoid turning the grave into a place where you break down again and again without allowing anything to heal. Crying is necessary. Remembering is necessary. But so is moving forward. Not moving forward to forget, but moving forward to live what God still wants to write with you. Sometimes we believe that moving forward is betraying the memory of the one we love, but it isn't. The true betrayal is allowing that person's death to extinguish the life within you. Bringing flowers is a beautiful gesture, but bringing an open heart is a much deeper one. Don't just bring objects, bring intention, bring gratitude, bring truth. Leave to God what weighs too heavily. Let go of what you cannot control. Forgive what wasn't perfect. Remember that human love, even the deepest, always has imperfections. These imperfections don't diminish love, they humanize it. And the grave is a mirror where you can gently accept that truth. There's a gesture that completely transforms the experience at a graveside. Blessing their memory, blessing what that person left in your life, blessing what you learned, blessing even what hurt, blessing their journey now in God's hands. The blessing doesn't change the deceased, it changes you. The blessing opens your heart to hope. It reminds you that your loved one's story didn't end on earth. It continues in God in a way you may not yet fully understand, but in which you can have faith. And here I want to tell you something delicate but profoundly true. The soul of the one you loved is not in the grave. The grave contains the body. The grave holds the physical history, but their soul is in God's hands. That's why when you do something out of resentment, hopelessness, guilt, or superstition, you're not affecting their eternal destiny. You're affecting how you relate to their memory, to your faith, and to your own soul. The best gift you can offer a deceased loved one is to live in a way that honors what they meant to you. Many people believe that the way to keep the bond with the deceased alive is to keep the pain alive. But God doesn't want you to maintain the bond through suffering. He wants you to maintain it through love. And love, when it matures, doesn't break you. It guides you. It doesn't imprison you, and it liberates you. It doesn't weaken you. It strengthens you. Love, even when it weeps, never stops pointing forward. Therefore, when you approach a grave, never do this. Don't get caught up in the idea that it's all over. Don't carry with you a narrow view of the future. Don't let absence become a reason to distrust life. Don't let death teach you despair. Let it teach you depth. Let it teach you humility. Let it remind you that every day you have is a gift. Let it make you more aware of how you love, how you speak, how you live. It's also important to avoid making promises born of pain rather than wisdom. Sometimes when we're at a graveside, we make vows that don't come from God, promises that imprison us, commitments that rob us of freedom, decisions that lack healthy roots. Don't say, I'll never love again, I'll never trust again, I'll never let anyone into my life again. The grave is a place for healing, not for sealing chains. One of the most spiritually beautiful acts you can perform at a grave is to surrender. Surrender what weighs you down. Surrender what still hurts. Surrender what you don't understand. Surrender the deceased into God's hands once more. Surrender your future. Surrender your vulnerability. Surrender that part of you that broke when that person left. Surrendering is not forgetting. It is letting go of what you cannot resolve on your own. And when you surrender, something is released. Something breathes. Something settles within you. Death is never easy to understand, but God never asks you to fully understand it. He asks you to trust, to lean on Him, to remember that the life He gave you did not end with that loss, even if your heart felt that it did. So when you visit the grave of a loved one, never arrive with a closed heart. Don't arrive with resentment, hopelessness, or paralyzing guilt. Don't arrive as someone who surrenders to sadness. Arrive as someone who knows that love doesn't end, that life goes on, that God sustains what you cannot. And when you leave the grave, don't leave with a sense of loss. Leave with the certainty that the love you experienced is greater than the death you faced. Leave with a prayer in your soul. Leave with a blessing on your lips. Leave with a softer heart, not a harder one. Because that is the true fruit of visiting a grave. Not the pain, but the light you can find within it. Honoring a loved one isn't about being trapped in their absence. It's about allowing their life to continue bearing fruit in yours. It's about loving more deeply. It's about living with more intention. It's about walking with God with a clarity that only arises when the soul has faced the mystery of death and found hope